Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Before we start, I want to thank my latest Patreon subscriber, John, for his support, as well as all my other Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to support the podcast financially and gain access to exclusive companion mini-episodes, articles, group Zoom meetings, 2 brand new series of interviews, or even conducting lessons, head over to patreon.com/A Mic on the Podium, where you will find 6 different levels of subscription, starting at just £5 a month. Alternatively, go to justgiving.com, search for A Mic on the Podium, and make a one-off donation there. Details are in the show notes below. Today, I conduct a conversation with a German conductor who has been through the German Kapellmeister system, going on to be chief conductor in Munich and Bern, Switzerland. He's also known for his work with the Chanterelle Orchestra here in the UK. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Kevin John Edusei. Kevin, it's wonderful to see you and speak to you today. How are you?
Good, Mike. It's great to talk to you.
Are you in Germany at the moment?
Yes, I'm in Munich, Germany right now. It's super snowy outside. I just took my kids to the kindergarten and came back to do this podcast with you.
Well, at least we're in a similar state. I'm in snowy Birmingham at the moment. So for those listeners later, when this episode comes out, you'll be able to work out when this was. Talking of kids, let's go right back and talk about when music first came into your life. You from a musical family at all? How did it manifest itself? What were the earliest musical instruments that you played?
Well, I'm not from a musical family per se. My parents aren't musicians. They also don't play any instruments. But nevertheless, classical music played a great and very important role in our family life. I can remember my father coming home from work, from the hospital where he would work as a surgeon, and he would sit down in his chair in the living room and put on his iconic Dieter Rams design bronze stereo and listen to classical recordings. I remember the cover of Carlos Kleiber Freischütz's recording with the Staatskapelle Dresden, the Deutsche Grammophon cover of that really vividly. And so yes, that was very important in our family life. Actually, everything changed when my grandmother started to live with us. My parents had built a house, and she had an apartment, a separate apartment within that house. And she had been a professional opera singer. She was born in 1912 and had worked until the war broke out, and that was a major influence for us.
I bet.
My parents thought it would be great if she could teach us at the piano, so they bought a piano for us. It turned out it was actually a pretty bad idea because my grandma was probably the opposite of a pedagogue, you could say. She was super strict. Even in her old days, she had crystal clear, perfect pitch, and if we would hit a wrong note, she would shout from the kitchen, "No, it should be a G flat, you idiot," And so in my sort of rebellion, that wasn't sort of my way of doing music, and later got a teacher, also a proper piano teacher, but also that didn't really work out for me. So when I entered my Sturm- und Drang-phase with being 12 or 13 years old, my obsession was becoming a rock drummer and a rock star. So I pulled out all the pans and pots in my mother's kitchen and had a probably quite nerve-wracking scheme of practicing on those pans and pots until she sent in an application for the local music school.
Well, going back on something there, the amount of times I've heard stories about people who are taught by their family members musical lessons, either piano or violin or whatever else, and it not going well. I mean, I decided early on that I wasn't going to teach any of my daughters and I obviously if they ask advice, but I wasn't going to be their violin teacher. I think I'm right in this fact. I know some people do very well and they're taught by their parents or their grandparents or whatever, but they're few and far between in my experience. Would you say that?
I totally agree on this one. I decided to not become the music teacher of my children as well.
So rock drumming, but I'm assuming that at some point turned into percussion, as in classical percussion, and therefore, were you ever interested in being, a marimba soloist, or was it straight away orchestral percussion for you? How did that happen, if it happened?
Well, actually, since I had come to a certain level of playing piano by then, very early I discovered, well, it would be great to combine my skills of being able to read in different clefs, being familiar with notation, and my desire to play percussion instruments. And therefore, I sort of switched to classical percussion very early on and dropped that wish of becoming a rock drummer, and was actually really absorbed by the possibilities of that I would discover by being able to play in an orchestra. So I became the timpanist of our school orchestra. I played percussion in ensembles, and also played the piano and kept playing the piano at the same time. So yes, I try to use all those influences, and at the same time, for me, the orchestra became more and more important as not only a social group I could be part of, but also as a language, a musical language that I'm still super familiar with, of course. But that really resonated with me, and I really got obsessed by classical music and symphonic repertoire in particular.
At this point, normally I would ask you about your experiences in youth orchestras with conductors. But then in a previous podcast, I spoke to Christopher Seaman, who you may know was the timpanist with the London Philharmonic Orchestra for a while. And therefore, my question is going to be slightly different to you in the fact that, of course, you had early experiences with conductors and conducting in youth orchestra. But then being the timpanist, you almost are the second conductor in the room when you have something with rhythm. How did you enjoy that role? And do you think, looking forwards or looking back now at your early musical life, that being a timpanist really excited you about conducting in any way?
Yes, I think there's something about timing of the whole orchestra, and of course the bass instruments, so the double bass section and the timpanist play a very crucial role in that. So when to place a chord, and also how influences the complete orchestra. And I mean, you're a conductor yourself. You must have experienced that. Also, the reaction time of an orchestra depends for those major tutti entrances, many for a great deal on the timpanist. Yes, so there is and there should be a very good connection between the conductor and the timpanist. Yeah.
Well, it made me think again about my dear friend Peter Hill, who has appeared on a Patreon episode of one of my other podcasts. But I remember him telling me when I first started conducting, he said, if I can give you one piece of advice, make friends with the timpanist. You don't want the timpanist as an enemy, and he's right. Even if you don't make friends with them, but at least musical friends with them, and
Sure.
to have them on board is a really important thing. You go on and study percussion, but also, I love this, you studied percussion, sound engineering, and conducting at the Berlin University of the Arts. How was that split time-wise? And I'm assuming this is where you first encountered a conducting teacher or mentor. Who was that? And in what style did they teach? I often ask, were they very much score and music prep based, or were they very much stick technique based, or a overall holistic approach?
It's actually quite a bit more complicated than that. When I was 15 or 16, I I did the entrance examination for classical percussion for the youth program of the Conservatory of Detmold, which is quite close to my hometown Bielefeld. And in Detmold, there is a music course called Tonmeister. So that's a course designed for people who not only work as a sound engineer, but also as a music producer. So it's also very, it tends also to be a very good musical course with very high standards of being able to play scores. So score playing is one of the prerequisites. You have to be able to read scores. You have to know the symphonic repertoire, and they also have a very strict entrance exam for that. So when I was 15 or 15, I enrolled. No, I was 16. I enrolled in that youth program, and so I got to meet other students of that Tonmeister course, and I found it so interesting that my decision was very clear that I wanted to become a Tonmeister. And from that point onwards, because you needed to have a repertoire and you needed to be able to score play, from then on, my obsession for symphonic music went on by going to the local library, getting scores, piano scores, listening to complete operas, listening through probably the major classical repertoire on CD, I'd say. Before I was 18, I had listened to all of the Haydn symphonies, Beethoven, Brahms, most of the Mozart symphonies, and so on. So I really made this a sort of sportive element in my hunger for music. And I got into that program, but they had a 2-year waiting time for that. And since I had also successfully done entrance examinations in The Hague at the Royal Conservatory and in Amsterdam, I started to study sound engineering and classical percussion as 2 majors in The Hague first of all. And well, my way to conducting also started there because I had just started with those 2 major studies, but there was an orchestra project led by Jacques van Steen, and I can clearly remember me joining as many rehearsals as I could. He was conducting Brahms' First Symphony, and maybe it also was because I had a crush on a blonde Dutch violist at that time. But but the combination of Brahms and my crush and Jacques' phenomenal conducting made it that I decided I need to become a conductor. And one day after the concert, I knocked on Jacques' teaching classroom door and told him, well, my name is Kevin. I want to become a conductor. And he, I mean, you know him. You've
Yes.
met him. He's an impressive figure, almost 2 meters
He
tall.
is, yeah.
And he stood in front of me and said, well, there are absolutely no work opportunities. You should go to Germany and good luck with it. And I think, knowing Jacques, he was sort of testing me there, because he wanted to know whether I really wanted it or whether it was just some idea a student that had just started had. And for myself, that was actually a quite important, very short meeting there, because I had to ask myself, okay, Kevin, you have really just started. Maybe it's good to finish the other studies first. And if you find out in a couple of years you still want to be a conductor, you can still do that.
Yes.
And that's when I started, together with 3 other composers, I started an ensemble for contemporary music, because I thought, well, I need to find out whether I'm any good at this. I took private lessons also for score playing and analysis, also on top of what I already had in my other courses, and learned by doing it, actually. And then almost 4 years. Yeah, I think 4 years later, after my orchestral diploma in classical percussion, I immediately did the entrance examination for conducting, and I was super happy to be part of that great class of Jacques van Steen and at Spaniard, the other teacher. And I really had the sort of homecoming feeling and thought, well, this is it, go for it.
Well, I'm going to come to Jack and Ed in a minute, but this podcast is going to be full of firsts. And I'm pretty sure you're the first person I've spoken to who's shown any interest or even qualified as a tonmeister. That must have given you a real, from the very beginning, and not only listening to all of those CDs and all of that Haydn symphonies, whatever, you must have a level of oral training and a level of oral listening to do that job that, most instrumentalists don't think of, or don't, they listen hard to themselves, but are they listening quite so much to everybody else? That must stand you in so much good stead now being a conductor, because you have the level of listening through being a tonmeister where, you're listening for one chord that's out of tune that therefore cannot be sent out on a CD, or a tiny little, clip of a horn note on a chord, and you think you can pick that out and go, yeah, that we cannot do that. We need to do another take. Do you think that's been a real bonus for you going forward now as a professional conductor?
I think it has been beneficial to my conducting, but I would stress that conducting is something completely else. So when we as conductors, on the podium, we stand at the spot with the worst balance. The orchestra is completely out of balance if you at the conducting podium at our desk actually, and so we have to translate that wrong balance to what the sound behind our backs might be. So that's a completely different role, I find, and that also comes through training and stepping also back, letting someone else conduct, and this is years of training, and that's something that is completely different from a tonmeister's job, of course. But yes, of course, the whole concept of how an orchestra can sound and should sound, and also how to maybe fix problems. That way of thinking has been very important for my conducting as well.
You're so right. And again, another first. We've never really discussed that job that we have of, well, it's informed guessing, I would call it, of what you're listening to and what it sounds like out in the hall. And that changes from hall to hall to hall. I mean, I've spent an awful lot of time either playing for 20 odd years or conducting in Symphony Hall in Birmingham. And actually my own knowledge of it grew through being an assistant conductor by going out and listening, and then realizing, well, what I hear on the podium bears no relation to what's out in the hall. And that's the best hall in the United Kingdom and one of the best in Europe, if not, top 5 or 10 in the world. It still bears no relation to what you hear when you're stood on the podium. And it's a fascinating thing that I think some people who listen to this podcast wouldn't know, or maybe wouldn't be aware of, that what you hear, I turn around and say to the seconds or violas, please play up there. And they go, well, we're already playing. I said, well, you won't hear it out there. And it is a fascinating thing we have to do, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think the difference between the sound where you stand and how it sounds in the hall in opera is even much greater. So the sound from the pit is totally different from what you hear in the audience. So when you do opera productions, you have to have some good ears also in the hall, and a good way of communicating with your assistants to make it work actually.
Well, I promised we would briefly look at Jack and Ed at the Hay Conservatory. Were they a sort of, in golfing terms, it's called ham and egg. You get one does one thing and the other does the other. Did they ham and egg it between them, or how they taught you, was one much more based on stick technique and rehearsal technique, and the other was much more into score study. How did they define their roles?
Ed and Jacques are completely different types of conductors, I'd say. So they didn't really have to stress the differences between them. It wasn't really meant to be like this. It just happened, and we benefited from it. Another teacher was also Kenneth Montgomery. He was also attached to the program, so we had a lot of influence. And probably also at the very beginning of our studies, of our course, you're dealing with more basic level things that any good conductor probably can teach you, and then later on you discover what specific things you really want to find out about your teacher's way of doing it. In between, then I went to Berlin, to the University of Arts. Had an intermezzo there with another teacher, because I wanted to find out how conducting is taught in Germany, in my home country. As you know, the German way of and the whole system of teaching, and also later to developing a career in conducting, is different from other countries. And I had the feeling I need to find out what it is to be back in Germany again.
Well, again, you've inspired me to ask a question which I've sort of alluded to in previous episodes, but never really asked quite so directly. If you consider that, you spent quite a few years with Ed and Jack in The Hague, but if I just list the people that you've either studied with or been mentored by, or probably appeared in masterclasses with, David Zinman in Aspen, then at Lucerne Festival Academy, there's Pierre Boulez and Peter Erdversch, and then other people like Mark Albrecht, Kurt Mazur, Sylvain Camberling. My question to you is, how did you sort of take the information that these mentors were giving you and sift out or sieve away the things that you think, well, I already know this, or actually I disagree with that, and find the nuggets of gold from these people and add it to what you'd been taught in a basic way by Ed and Jack and by Kenneth Montgomery? When you were in these masterclasses or in these situations, were you thinking then, oh, this is gold? Or did it come to you much later and think, oh, do you know what Pierre Boulez said there, actually, I really need? How did you work that in your mind? Because I can imagine, I mean, I've had a few mentors, but not that many. I can imagine it can get quite confusing, like it would do if you went for violin lessons with 10 different teachers. There's going to be some contradictory information given to you. How did you work it out?
I think for every conductor, it's very important early on to develop a very good sense of what you yourself want and what you stand for, what you can do and what you cannot do. That's very essential for becoming a conductor, because also later on in your career you'll get many influences. People talk to you, people judge you, you read recensions and or reviews about your work in the papers, so you're confronted with a whole bunch of opinions about what you do. And also when you stand in front of a group of people, there are as many different opinions about what you're dealing with as people in the room. So you have to be self-assured enough that what you have to bring to the table is substantial. And I can't really say how the process works. Yes, there were people where I instantly thought, this is gold. This is something I can directly integrate in my way of working. For example, meeting Peter Erdversch, who's become also a very influential colleague, or David Zinman. Others, I just watched and saw and thought, okay, this is absolutely a way of doing it, but that's not my way of doing it. So yes, you have to sift out and see what suits you best.
Another first. In 2008, you win the Dimitri Metropolis conducting competition. I believe it's the first time I've met a winner of that. It's not a competition I know very much about. Is it one of these that happens over a week with a jury and there's many rounds and it's whittled down? If so, how many rounds? Was it one of these incredibly complicated ones where you don't really know what you're getting until 24 hours beforehand? Can you remember much about it? And also, afterwards, did you get any support? I know from a couple of people, Jonathan Hayward, who won the Besançon competition, that afterwards he was assigned somebody who looked after him to do with finding an agent or choosing an agent, more importantly. How was that Metropolis competition? Because I don't know very much about it.
It was. I'm not even sure whether it still exists, actually, because I know that they ran into financial troubles a couple of years after my participation also. But it was with the Athens Radio Orchestra, and it was in several rounds. There was quite a lot of repertoire we had to learn. Also contemporary pieces. I remember doing in the first round probably The Soldier's Tale of Stravinsky plus something else, and
well, that would whittle down the competition with The Soldier's Tale in round one. I mean, you're going to lose a lot of people there, aren't you?
Yes, I think that was the goal. Yeah, that was the goal there. I remember being the only one doing the Egmont Overture in 3 instead of in 6, as it is often done traditionally. And well, winning that competition for me was really quite important, even though from a standpoint of, well, I didn't have anyone who would advise me about later engagements, for example, and also they invited me back for a project, but there wasn't a complete scheme that they had worked out of how you can really help someone further and with their career. So it helped and it opened some doors, but it wasn't that important for my career, I'd say. One good thing came out of that, that was that I shortly after was invited by the Staatskapelle Dresden to step in for Peter Schneider, taking over a production on short notice. So that was really helpful for me, of course, to be there. But I'd say because I by that time also was working as a first Kapellmeister, my career was on a different trajectory anyway.
Well, that was going to be my question in the fact that you won that in 08, but in 04, you'd started down the road of, and we sort of touched on it earlier on, the German conducting system, this Kapellmeister system. Now, our listeners, again, another first. You're the first person to have really gone through this system. And it was at Theater Bielefeld, which is your hometown, as you said, and going on to become Deputy General Music Director. What is the Kapellmeister system? How does it work? I'm intrigued, and I know our listeners will be intrigued, because I know it's possibly a word that's been dropped out in earlier podcasts, and it's been glossed over or ignored. I really want to know what it's all about. Tell us what the Kapellmeister system is.
It's brutal, Mike.
You're smiling, but I can see in your eyes that it's brutal.
It's absolutely brutal and wonderful at the same time. In Germany, the traditional way of having a career as a conductor would be starting as a co-repetitor. So working as a pianist with singers, helping to learn their parts, coaching singers also sometimes. and then working your way up to positions within the opera house where you get your first conducting jobs. That could be leading a kids concert, or could be stepping in for another conductor, taking over productions, or assisting the general music director. As a Kapellmeister, you're in that musical hierarchy of the house, you're let's say number 2 behind the general music director. And it's a very complicated role you have to fulfill, because you're part assisting for someone, and for the other part you're also responsible for your own first nights and premieres and productions that you have to do. So usually at a mid-level house in Germany, you probably do 3 own premieres in the music theater. You probably also would be responsible for the kids concerts. You would have maybe 1 or 2 subscription concerts within the symphonic realm, and you would also assist the chief conductor or music director with his 3 productions, plus then taking over all the productions, so that you can feel probably that it's just the workload is so intense. If you think or if you know that in Germany most productions are done within 6 to 8 weeks of rehearsal time, and rehearsals start at 10 o'clock in the morning, go until 2 p.m. Then there's a 4-hour break, and then you rehearse again from 6 o'clock in the evening until 10. And that goes for 6 days in a week. And in between, you have auditions, you have to prepare things, you have concerts, you have performances. So it's like it's a massive workload you have to deal with. I remember one season where I did 4 premieres in the music theater, and I conducted 10 operas, including what was it again? Including Madama Butterfly, Fidelio, Lucia di Lammermoor, Don Carlo, a modern opera, Zar und Zimmermann, and also 3 or 4 other operas that I have forgotten about, and I, when you stand in the pit and you do those major works, and sometimes it's later in the evening and you're in the third act of a longer opera, and you turn the page and you just pray that you know what is on that page and you're still beating in the right time. That's a wonderful feeling for a young conductor to have. And also, I mean, it helps because once you have done that, there's just nothing that can scare you. I must say, it's when I look now at opportunities to jump in or to do something on short notice, nothing compares to the anxiety of what I experienced at being a young Kapellmeister at a German provincial house.
You've made me think of a question, really, because I think I might have spotted it. What you've just described probably encapsulates why suddenly conductors appear at the end of this system. You hear nothing about them. The reason being is that they haven't got time to go and guest conduct anywhere. I would imagine your time is spent totally in your theatre. You did a stint in Bielefeld at home and also in Augsburg. You basically have no time to do anything else. But at the end of it, you come out of this system fully formed, ready to go, guest conducting, or in the opera. Now all of a sudden people go, people who are not German and not in the Kapellmeister system will go, oh, where's this guy come from? But the reason being is that you have not got time to go out and guest conduct anywhere else. I'm sure that's the case, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's absolutely the case, Mike. There was actually no time for, the Metropolis competition was the only competition I could do. Wow. So I was lucky to win it because I was invited for the Donatella Flick competition, but then I had to step in on short notice for the music director to do Aida. So I had to cancel that. And that happened numerous times. So you're really absorbed by the house, and that's a tricky balance to start a career if you're also interested in symphonic music. And that was my first love. That's why I became a conductor, and I luckily discovered how great opera and music theater is. But that was my main goal. So I had to decide at a certain point, okay, if I really want to lean more towards symphonic repertoire, I need to cancel my job as Kapellmeister, and that's when I quit my job in Augsburg.
And then managed to have two roles running side by side for 3 or 4 years, where you still are chief conductor of the Munich Symphony Orchestra, but then not so long ago you stopped being chief at the Concerttheater Bern, which is as you just said, theatre, music, and opera. You were principal guest there beforehand, so you've had a relationship. So you managed to split your time between doing symphonic work in Munich and doing opera and theatre in Bern, which for me must be the best of all worlds, in the fact that you can go and do a 6-week run and then come back to Munich and do a couple of weeks there and then maybe fit in a guest thing. Is that how it worked out for you, or works out for you?
Yes, that's how it worked out. I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to be the chief conductor of a symphony orchestra, and at the same time also be a chief conductor at an opera house, and therefore being able to combine my passion for both working in the pit and on stage. And Bern was a sort of gift. I'd jumped in on short notice. I'd taken over a Lucia di Lammermoor performance there, not knowing that they were looking for a music director for the opera house. And I had just shortly after I started to become chief conductor in Munich, and then they kept asking me to come back and to conduct, and that was a lovely time with a wonderful orchestra. It's actually when I stepped in there, I hadn't heard about the opera house and the orchestra at all, and I was astounded by the high quality and the level that they have. You must know that it's a quite small opera house in Bern. It's wonderful and beautiful house, but the orchestra is quite big. It has around 110 musicians, so it's
Wow.
quite a big orchestra with a very good level, and also with a very special sound, which I truly love, because Bern is maybe only 30 kilometers from where the French part of Switzerland starts. And you have a German-speaking majority in the orchestra, I'd say, but you have probably more than 30 to 40% French-speaking musicians. And that gives that special lightness in sound. I mean, it's very stereotypical what I say here, but it's also a little bit true. And it gives a lightness in sound and flexibility, and still this sort of warmth and depth of string sound that you would expect from a German speaking orchestra.
Before we get to your proms debut, which I will get to soon, just going slightly over those last two topics, in the fact that because you'd been a Kapellmeister and didn't have time to guest conduct, and then all of a sudden you're a chief conductor of a symphony orchestra and of an opera house, so your diary is pretty much filled before anybody can ask you to go and guest conduct. But recently, in the last couple of years, I've seen your name pop up much more often as a guest conductor in places. I'm assuming that guest conducting doesn't fill you with quite so much dread as it might have done if you were younger, going and meeting an orchestra for the first time. That moment when you put a downbeat down and you have no idea what's going to come back at you or when it's going to come back at you. But how have you found, I've called it the hamster wheel of guest conducting. The hamster wheel because, you get on it, it's very difficult to get off it. But the point is, hamsters do actually enjoy being on that wheel. So, how have you found it? And have you had any mental approaches, where just to make sure that you're calm enough when you first stand in front of the LSO or whatever it might have been? How's it been for you guest conducting?
Well, I haven't really been on that hamster wheel of guest conducting because, as you said, I was so busy fulfilling those two chief conductor positions at the same time. But when I stopped working in Bern, those possibilities now pop up and start to become more and more, and I really enjoy it because once you're self-assured enough that you know that you have the technique and the knowledge and the repertoire to work with an orchestra, then it's an absolute gift if you get the opportunity to meet new people and get to know more orchestras.
Yeah. Well, it must either be as a consequence of being guest conducting, or I don't really know how soon you became involved with Chineke, the orchestra based here in the UK, and you conducted their first commercial recording, but also their Proms debut in 2017. How important is it, or was it, for you to get involved with Chineke? How did it come about? Did you know Chi-Chi, the lady who set it up? What's your history with it? And I'm assuming you're still conducting them, or you will do when we get out of this pandemic situation.
I was approached by Chi-Chi in Monaco in 2016, and she would invite me for a project with the orchestra. And I had seen, I think, a clip of Chineke conducted by Wayne Marshall on Facebook.
Yeah, he did Beethoven 7, I think, didn't he?
Yes, I think
one of the early concerts.
Was the first? I think that was actually the first concert of Chineke.
Yeah.
And I was invited for the second concert 1 year later.
Right. Okay.
And happily accepted that invitation because I thought, well, this would be a very personal and intense experience to work with an orchestra that is only or mostly with players that are people of color, but also I mean it's a diverse orchestra, but the other way around, let's say.
Yes.
And I can tell you, standing in front of an orchestra, I remember the first rehearsal that we had in London. And, before the orchestra, players, start to sit down, put out their fiddle, play a few notes. And then, the whole room was finally completely full of people of color. And I heard the A, and I was about to stand in front of the people. I was shocked that I almost couldn't talk. I was really in a sort of freeze state because up to that point in my musical career and all my experiences as a young child, I had always been the only black kid and black classical music nerd. And to experience that sort of feeling that, oh, I'm not the only one, gave me so much relief and energy, and that I decided at that point I would work with the orchestra whenever they wanted me to, or would need support on things, or whatever I could do, because I think it's so crucial for musicians to have idols, to have people who can influence them. I found those people like in family members, as my grandmother, for example. I could look up to. My musical mentors like Jacques, and also my percussion teacher Wim Voss, they have been very influential. And I think this is a very, very good project to broaden and widen the scope that classical music has, and to make it more approachable for people of color or children of color.
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing. I remember that prom's debut, and long may it continue, and long may more people be inspired to take up music or just to be involved and listening to music and through Chineke, and bravo to all, if that's the right phrase. One last question, and it's a question that I've asked virtually every conductor, because not only do classical music lovers find it interesting, but conducting geeks really want to know. When you come to learn a new score, do you have a system? Do you sit at your desk, start on page 1 and finish at the end, or do you do it a different way? And when you learn a new score, are you a marker in of things? Do you use pencils? Do you use colored pencils, highlighter pens? What do you do? How do you go about it?
How much time do we have, Mike?
As much as you like. I mean, some people really don't write anything. What I'm learning is that a lot of what we do as conductors is so varied and so different.
Yes.
I've had somebody said I never write anything into I've even published an article of the color system I use on my Patreon page. So, tell us, what do you do?
Well, I dropped colors very early. Because for me, music on paper has a sort of aesthetic value on its own. I like to see notes on paper, and if I write colors on top of that, for me, it's a layer that is sort of in the way of the music, of the text. And also, I found out that when I come back to a piece and I do something again, I rather tend to have no markings at all, actually. So I'm only using a pencil, and I do write a lot of things in the score, but mainly, let's say, interpretational decisions, like on how I want an articulation, and what would I write into a part of a musician. And for the repertoire up to, let's say, Schumann and Brahms, if I have enough time, I always prepare my own orchestral music. I write my own bowings, and I meticulously prepare my material. So everything that I put in the player's parts, in the orchestral parts, is also in my score, so that I have a really clear reference of what the player has in front. And then in terms of learning a score, for me is very important is to do an analysis based on the phrase length and musical periods, and I have an own system how I divide this, and very often I also write underneath like 4+3, 3+4, 2, 2, 2, and so on, so that I get a clear sense of how the structure is made. And you find out, or I found out, that a lot of composers also play around with this. I mean, probably the most advanced composer in this is Mozart, how he uses different phrase length and period length to tell something. So this is like a first step, I'd say. And then later I sort of peel off layer by layer of that composition. I look at specific harmonic progressions and transitions, and how is a modulation done, and then I really go into details and define how I want this to sound. And I'm not working at the piano too much. I use the piano mainly for harmonic things. If I really can't hear a chord, and I will play that. Or if I'm unsure about some transpositions, awkward things, then I'll check at the piano. But mainly I work at the desk, and I do a lot of half internal humming and singing, I'd say. So I really, certainly when I do opera, I sing through every part, and I really also define how I would breathe, and put that also in the score, so that I have a sort of basis when I meet a singer, that I can also give him a set of options that would be more in line with my sort of interpretation. And so we have a sort of ground on which to discuss. And then, yes, as I said, I try to prepare music as much as possible. Certainly now with Corona, I'm working a lot on orchestral parts. I just finished my own set of Brahms 2, and I'm Schumann's Second Symphony, which I hopefully will be doing with the Royal Scottish what's it called, RSNO, Royal Scottish Northern Orchestra, Royal Northern
National
Scottish
Orchestra.
National
Royal
Orchestra.
Scottish
Royal
National
Scottish
Orchestra.
National Orchestra. Sorry, out there, RSNO. So that's what's keeping me busy also during Corona, and I must say, learning scores is so much fun for me. It's I really love it, and I'm doing it also to stay sane in these times.
Yeah, well, I'm doing this podcast to stay sane, and really enjoyed chatting to everybody and finding out that question, the answer to that question, always fascinates me, because everybody does it differently. Every time I speak to a conductor, it's different.
What's your way of doing it, actually?
I generally do much the same with, I will start with a big overview of the score, flicking through it, not making any markings at all. I then might do some historical research and find out when it was written, what the composer's life was, what was happening in the composer's life, whatever. I may then listen to a couple of seminal recordings, but again, the pencil is not even in my hand. And then I'll go from the very beginning and I'll work my way through it. But I do use colors, and I think for me, the writing in of things and information makes me learn it better. So, I mean, there have been times I remember, you were talking about turning over a page and not hopefully knowing what's on the other side. I know what's there because I remember writing it in, if that makes sense. That's my way of assimilating the information. I do similar things with phrase structure, but actually I use a set of geometric symbols to show that it's a 3-bar phrase or a 4-bar phrase, or I'll use triangle shapes and bracket shapes and whatever, and it sort of helps me assimilate it. But that's how I do it. And again, I might go to, I don't play the piano very well, but I might go to the piano and try something out. I've got a violin on my desk. I might pick it up and try a bowing out. But then as an ex-violinist, I very rarely prescribe bowings to orchestras, because each orchestra has a different idea of bowings. And as a fiddle player, the amount of times somebody would bring their parts and the leader would change the bowing and then change it back again afterwards. That sort of thing happens. So, I'm less fussy about bowings, but then maybe that's the way I play the fiddle, if that makes sense. I always thought, well, I should be able to make the same sound going up or down, but that's how I do it. But then, I've had other conductors come on here and say, if I wrote anything into my score, I wouldn't know it at all. And then other people who use even more colors than me, and it's very, very, it's like the old George Schulte. If you look at a George Schulte score, you'll be lucky to find any printed material underneath all of the colors. It looks like a Jackson Pollock painting. So, he didn't have a bad career, so it must have worked for him. It's a fascinating thing. And
I
a
think
question.
Sorry to interrupt you here.
No,
I think
fine.
I agree with you on the process of writing. Also helps me to know that I have thought about something, and makes is a very almost haptical event, so that when I write something in, there's also no excuse anymore to not know what is there. And but as you said, those markings probably become less important once you are finished with that process, and you stand there. I don't need any markings that indicate me that I have to give a certain entrance or something. I don't need that sort of information. It's more about interpretation, and in contemporary music it might be a little bit different. I have a very refined system of indicating how subdivisions are conducted. If you for example, when I did Nixon in China by John Adams or something, you have a system where you can really safely rely on, so that if you turn the page and there is this awkward part change, then that you're completely self, even if your muscle memory is not giving you the right clues.
Well, I would imagine in Nixon in China, because I don't know it. I know bits of it. I don't know it all, but I would imagine it's much like a discussion I had with another conductor about Magnus Lindberg. I was talking to Dalia Stasevska. There are these mathematical relations between one section and the next, where, whilst you're conducting in one tempo, you have to be subdividing in your head, maybe thinking of quintuplets against what you're conducting to be able to get the next tempo. And yes. I would think that if I didn't write those in, I might get to that time change or that meter, that tempo change, and think, is this the quintuplet one, or is this the 16th note one, or is this the triplet one? I would want to know exactly that. I must be thinking 3 bars ahead, 5s against 3s, that sort of thing, to be able to get the maths right. So hats off to those who don't write that sort of stuff in. I need to, and I'm not ashamed to say it. So
neither am I.
At this point, I usually ask the conductors if there is anything else they want to talk about, and Kevin asked me if I had ever worked with the American conductor David Zinman. His reasons for asking me and the following 10-minute discussion about the art of accompanying soloists in both concerti and in the opera house has been made into a Patreon-exclusive companion mini-episode. For just £5 a month, you will gain access to this episode and all of the other previous mini-episodes, as well as a monthly bulletin podcast, a monthly interview with a prominent figure in the classical music world, articles, essays, and much more. Details of how to subscribe are in the show notes below, and it's very quick and easy to join. Now, it's time for the all-important 10 questions. Kevin, it's 10 questions time. Every conductor's favourite bit. Possibly. Maybe not. Who knows? And I always start with the first 2. What sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
There is a very particular sound in string playing, orchestral string playing, when the higher strings play in the upper registers. Let's say first, second violins have a line in unison, can be also a wonderful atonal line, melody or something. And you hear that noise of the strings and the bow hair. And you hear that sort of
yes,
sound in the orchestra. And that is a sound that I absolutely love. And the sound that I totally hate is the sound of cutlery dropped on our wooden floor by our little children. I absolutely hate that. And it happens all the time. Every meal someone drops their knives or spoons or whatever.
If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
I probably would spend my time with my family. If out in the nature, just having a walk, being somewhere on a mountain, anything that is within, anything together with them. And if I was alone, I probably would be scuba diving.
Oh, wow.
In my dry suit, looking up, watching my ascending bubbles to the surface, sunlight from above, and hopefully being able to see mountain tops if I'm in a mountain lake.
What a wonderful answer. It's always something I've fancied doing but never had the guts to. So actually, being an asthmatic, I'm probably not allowed to either. Then the next one, you can have more than one, obviously. Who would be a favourite conductor of Yesteryear?
It would be Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. I think who has been such an influential conductor. One of the first conductors who who used the baton consistently, I think, if I'm informed correctly. And without Felix Mendelssohn, we probably, or maybe we pieces as the great C major symphony by Schubert, or Saint Matthew's Passion, or other pieces by Berlioz would not be in our repertoire in the way that they are. So yes, I think very influential conductor of the past.
Another first. Nobody's mentioned Mendelssohn. Wonderful. The question that most conductors don't like, I don't know why. Nobody's told me why they don't like it. I mean, Daniel Harding thinks it's cruel, or thought it was cruel, and others go, "Oh, geez, Mike, do you really want me to answer this?" And who would be a favourite current conductor?
I think it's not cruel at all. I mean, there are so many colleagues that I really admire for what they're doing. So it's I'm very happy to answer that question. For me, when I was younger, Nikolaus Harnoncourt was a major figure, major source of influence. I really admired what he was doing a lot. Then later, John Elliott Gardiner has been permanently a great influence. I think I know probably 80 to 90% of all his recordings, and I find that I have a very strong relationship to his idea of musical tempi. I can really relate to that. And who else? I find very, very exciting what the Belgian conductor Josefan Immersel does with his band Anima Eterna Brüche. So they play on period instruments, and I think they arrived now at George Gershwin's music, but very inspiring, fantastic recordings of the music of Debussy, Schubert, as I said, Gershwin, and I think also Mussorgsky. I think there's also a recording of pictures of an exhibition. And I find François Xavier Roth very, very inspiring. I don't know how he does it, but he achieves a very typical sound from every orchestra he's working with. I find that fantastic, and I like his repertoire choices because he's also having a very wide scope on what is possible within classical music. Of the younger generation, I think Andres Nelson is just fantastic. I find he has the sound of the orchestra almost glued to his body.
That's true.
you must have performed many times with him, I guess. And I have
yes,
always
I played. Yeah, the last 6 years of my playing career was under Andres at the CBSO. And yeah, the wonderful phrase you just used, the sound is sort of glued to his body. As a player, I was never conducted by somebody quite so physical as Andres in the way he conducts. And it does manifest itself in the way that you play. Very spontaneous, takes risks all of the time. And as an orchestral player, I love that. You had no idea when you got to a traffic island or a roundabout whether you were going to go round it clockwise, anti-clockwise, or just straight over the middle of it, and crashing into cars as you went. You just never had any idea what was going to happen, and it was fun, so really good choice. What is the hardest work you have ever conducted?
Technically, Stockhausen's Gruppen for 3 orchestras. Because it puts you, I mean, you'll get there. It's not that difficult, but it puts the conductors also in the role of chamber musicianship or chamber musicians, because you have to interact with the 2 other conductors very closely. So I had the opportunity to do this piece within the Lucerne Festival, and I had 2 great other conductors, Pablo Heras Casado and Lin Liao, and we would for hours and hours practice with our metronomes to get it right, and we got it right. So probably technically that was one of the hardest pieces. Emotionally, I'd say Tristan und Isolde, because after those couple of hours in the pit, I never felt that exhausted. And whenever I conducted that piece, I just wanted to walk straight home, didn't want to talk to anyone else, just wanted to have silence. And it's a piece that really humbles me, because I think it's a piece that you can work on forever. But there's one particular piece I have a I'd say love and hate relationship with, and that is Mozart's Die Entführung aus dem Serail, the abduction from the
Okay.
Seraglio. Well, I've
Yeah.
done that piece in 4 different productions. 3 of them were my own productions, and the first time I did the piece, it was a complete disaster. Audience hated the production. I think I was musically not to a point where I really could have a good grip on the music. So 2 years later, I'm doing that production again, and I thought by myself, okay, I've done this piece of cake now, and another disaster actually.
Oh God.
Completely different staging. Also didn't work out. People hated it up to a point where after the premiere there was still booing when when the orchestra had already left the pit.
Oh my God.
Then I had a sort of good experience with the piece, conducting it at the Staatskapelle Dresden in a wonderful production. And then, as music director in Bern, did a 4th production with the American director Lydia Steyer, where I finally had the idea, okay, now I know how this piece works. But it took me quite a long time to figure it out. And I think also among the Mozart operas it's really, and they are all very, very difficult, don't get me wrong, but I think this is one of the most difficult ones. If you pick a wrong tempo, a complete musical number doesn't work. If you have bad staging, the piece doesn't work. If you have singers who can't speak the text, you have problems. There are so many things that can make this piece go wrong. So definitely the hardest piece I've ever done.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
I'm an absolute coffee nerd, so I always bring fresh beans. Maybe an AeroPress. That's a device where you can produce fantastic filter coffee, or a Hario V60 for the coffee nerds out there. That's a pour-over device, and the Porlex mini hand grinder. So you'll find me grinding my beans in the hotel room, and so I'll make some fresh coffee, and then I'm ready to go.
That is nerdy. Absolutely wonderful, though. I'm nerdy in various other away from music things, and get me talking about watches. I can reel off serial numbers and all sorts of things as well. So that's wonderful. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
Being away from family so often. And certainly, if you have smaller kids where their development is so fast, it's really terrible to come back 1 week later from an engagement and then discover that your kid has learned something something important and you couldn't witness it. And also, when you're away and travel, you have so many impressions and new ideas, and not to be able to really share them firsthand together with your partner or your family is sometimes really difficult.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
That's a very simple answer. I'd be a doctor. I'd be a surgeon.
Is this because, did you say your father was a doctor?
Yes,
surgeon?
I come from a family. My father is a surgeon. My elder sister is a surgeon. I'm married to a gynecologist. So I very simple answer, straight answer. I'd be a doctor for sure.
if the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Since I'm married to an Austrian, it probably would be a mushroom. Oh, what's it called? It's called Schwammerl-Gulasch in Austrian. So it's a mushroom goulash, maybe.
That sounds good.
Made from Eierschwammeln. Those are those yellow mushrooms you find very often in the mountains. You can go and look for them yourself and collect them, which is what I love. So I think they're called Chanterelle. Is that possible? Is that a mushroom?
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's made with fresh herbs and white wine probably and dumplings, Knödeln. So it's a Schwammerl-Gulasch with Knödeln. And probably I would drink a typical Austrian white wine like a Grüner Veltliner with it.
Oh, I absolutely love Austrian and German food, and that sounds wonderful. Really, really wonderful. It's approaching lunchtime. I'm getting hungry now. Kevin, what an absolute joy it's been. I've loved chatting to you. So many firsts in the podcast today. And I hope when this is all over, we can sit down and maybe have a bowl of that goulash. That sounds amazing.
I will definitely make that goulash for you. And I will try to collect fresh mushrooms, not the wrong ones for you, so that we don't end up in the hospital at the end. But Mike, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a conductor who was born in Russia, but later moved to Finland, where he studied at the Sibelius Academy, before going on to have jobs with 3 different Finnish orchestras. He's also principal conductor with an orchestra in Spain, and has a very high-profile career as a guest conductor with some of the world's top orchestras. Until then, bye-bye.